The acrid smell of burnt coal and fear choked the afternoon air, but it was the silence, the horrifying, unnatural absence of human sound where there should have been shouting, that slammed into Ava first. One moment, she was perched on a rocky outcrop, the wind whipping strands of auburn hair across her face, trying to calculate how many more shifts at the diner it would take to stave off eviction. The next, the ground below her had buckled, the mine entrance a gaping maw where it once had been a hive of activity, now spewing dust and a dreadful quiet. This wasn't just a mine collapse. This was her town, Blackwood, West Virginia, crumbling before her eyes. And in that terrifying, frozen instant, something long dormant within Ava, a fierce, unyielding instinct she thought she'd buried with her nursing scrubs, roared back to life. The eviction notice, crinkled and stark against the faded floral pattern of her kitchen table, had been a cold slap to Ava's already bruised spirit. She'd fled the relentless, soul-crushing grind of the ER in Charleston 2 years ago, seeking a slower pace, a chance to heal. Blackwood, her hometown, a place scarred by the boom and bust of the coal industry, had offered a familiar, if somewhat bleak, comfort. But comfort, she was learning, didn't pay the bills. Now, every shift at Pop's diner felt like a fresh cut, another layer of her professional identity flayed away, leaving her raw and exposed. She'd sought solace on the old hiking trail overlooking the Blackwood mine, a jagged scar on the otherwise verdant Appalachian landscape. The air, usually thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, was today tinged with a metallic tang, a distant whisper of industrial decay. Below, a steady hum emanated from the mine's machinery, the rhythmic thrum of commerce that kept this town, and its people, barely alive. She closed her eyes, trying to conjure a time when her hands knew the confident weight of a defibrillator, not the sticky residue of maple syrup. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd left the ER because she couldn't save everyone, because the futility had become a suffocating shroud. Now, the futility of her own life was doing much the same. A low growl, like the earth itself clearing its throat, vibrated through the rock beneath her. Ava's eyes snapped open. The hum from the mine had vanished, replaced by a deep, guttural rumble that grew in intensity, rattling her teeth, shaking the very ground. She instinctively braced herself, hand flying to the rough bark of a nearby tree. Below, the mine entrance, usually a neat, reinforced portal, began to shudder. A hairline crack spiderwebbed across the rock face above it, then another, wider one, groaning like an ancient beast. The roar became deafening, an avalanche of stone and metal. Dust exploded skyward, a monstrous cloud swallowing the sun, turning the world an apocalyptic ochre. The ground lurched violently, throwing Ava against the tree. She watched, horrified, as a massive section of rock face peeled away, cascading down, burying the mine's main entrance in a terrifying silent fury. A smaller secondary entrance, used for equipment, remained partially exposed, but it too was choked with debris. When the dust began to settle, revealing the devastation, a collective gasp rose from the handful of townsfolk who'd been closer to the mine entrance, now scrambling back in terror. Then came the shouts, disembodied cries of alarm, swiftly followed by a dreadful, profound silence. The only sound was the distant wail of a siren, a response still minutes away, painfully slow. Panic rippled through the onlookers. Phones were pulled out, not to call for help, but to record the spectacle, their screens glowing morbidly in the haze. Ava stared, her heart hammering against her ribs, a primal fear coiling in her gut. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, a familiar cold clarity, the adrenaline-fueled focus that had once been her professional constant. She wasn't an ER nurse anymore. She was just Ava, waitressing for tips. But the sight of that dust, that silence, ignited a spark. "There's gotta be people down there!" someone shrieked, a woman pointing wildly. Ava didn't need to be told. She saw the figures, tiny and frantic, emerging from the dust, stumbling from the periphery of the collapsed main entrance. But then she saw him. A man, partially visible, pinned beneath a freshly fallen support beam near the equipment entrance. He wasn't moving. A foreman, a burly man named Mr. Davies, whom Ava recognized from the diner, was frantically yelling into a radio, his face ashen, while other workers stood frozen, staring at the horror. No one was going to the man. It was a flicker of a second, an instinct, raw and unthinking. Ava didn't debate, didn't calculate the risks, didn't weigh her expired license against the dire need. She just moved. Her feet found purchase on the crumbling slope, carrying her down the ridge at a reckless pace. The words of her old nursing instructor echoed in her mind. First responders' primary duty: assess, then act. She scrambled over loose rock, slid down a dirt embankment, ignoring the scrapes and bruises. The air grew thicker with dust and the metallic tang of crushed ore. When she reached him, the man was a ghastly tableau. His face was gray, eyes unfocused. He was partially pinned, one leg grotesquely bent beneath the beam. His chest was still, no breath, no pulse. His name, she would learn later, was Ben. And in that moment, with the chaos of the collapse still settling around them, with the siren's wail still a distant promise, Ava made the only choice she could. She dropped to her knees beside him, her mind snapping into that familiar, terrifyingly efficient rhythm. The first compression was a sickening crunch. Ava ignored it. She positioned her hands, locked her elbows, and leaned in, putting her entire body weight behind it. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. The rhythm was ingrained, a primal beat that had once defined her days. But this wasn't a sterile hospital floor. This was cold, damp earth, gritty with coal dust. Ben's clothes were ripped, his face smeared with grime and a trickle of blood. He was heavier, stiffer than any dummy she'd ever trained on. "Hey, what the hell do you think you're doing?" The voice was Mr. Davies, the foreman, red-faced and furious, suddenly at her side. He tried to grab her arm. "You're not authorized. This is a work site. You're contaminating everything." Ava didn't even look up. "Get back," she snarled, her voice raw, surprising herself with its ferocity. She pushed his hand away with a violent shove, never breaking rhythm. "He's dying. If I stop, he dies. Call 911 again. Get a goddamn AED. Just get back." Davies, taken aback by her unyielding fury, stumbled back a step. He continued to sputter, but Ava's focus was absolute, tunnel vision on Ben's still chest. The minutes stretched into an eternity. Her shoulders burned, her back screamed in protest. She tasted blood in her mouth, a faint metallic tang from biting her lip, fighting the fatigue. She focused on his face, a stranger's face, but in this moment, the only thing that mattered. She saw his wife, his kids, his life, flickering in her mind, a desperate mantra. "Don't quit. Don't you dare quit." The distant wail grew louder, then faded, then grew again. Relief, a fleeting promise. But it felt like hours, and in many ways, it would be. Officer Riley was the first official responder to arrive, his squad car kicking up dust as it skidded to a halt. He was young, fresh-faced, with a meticulously pressed uniform that seemed absurdly clean against the backdrop of destruction. He took one look at Ava, covered in mud and sweat, straddling the prone miner, and his brow furrowed with disapproval. "Ma'am, you need to step away from the victim," Officer Riley said, his voice clipped and authoritative, echoing the procedural training she knew too well. He approached cautiously, his hand instinctively going to his hip, eyes scanning the chaotic scene. "Emergency services are on their way. Let the professionals handle this." Ava didn't stop. Her arms were leaden, her breath ragged. "I am a professional," she gasped between compressions, her voice strained. "He has no pulse, no breath. He'll be dead before your professionals even get their gloves on." "Ma'am, I understand you want to help, but this is a crime scene, potentially an industrial accident, and you're interfering," Riley insisted, trying to take her arm. "You're not certified for this. You could be making things worse." "I'm keeping him alive," Ava screamed, her voice cracking with exhaustion and fury. She shoved his hand away again, surprising him with her strength. "If you want to help, get me an AED. Or better yet, get yourself over there and direct traffic. Don't you dare tell me to stop." Riley hesitated, clearly unnerved by her desperate intensity. He looked from her wild, determined eyes to the lifeless face of the miner. He was out of his depth. He mumbled something about protocol and safety, but she cut him off, a sharp, guttural sound of pure exertion. He backed off, pulling out his radio, his face a mask of confusion. The sun began its slow descent, casting long, eerie shadows across the devastated mine. Dust continued to cling to the air, making every breath a chore. Ava's muscles screamed. Her arms felt like jelly, her back a hot, throbbing knot of pain. She could feel the friction of her skin against Ben's torn shirt, the dampness of his body against her. Every compression was a monumental act of will. She focused on the count, a relentless, monotonous chant in her head. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, breathe. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, breathe. She didn't know how long she'd been at it. An hour? More? Her vision blurred at the edges. Her arms felt like they were moving through quicksand. She closed her eyes for a split second, gasping for air, then forced them open again, fixing on Ben's face. He was still pale, still unresponsive. But something in her refused to let go. This wasn't just about saving him anymore. It was about proving them all wrong, proving that humanity, that individual effort, still mattered. The first faint flicker of life had been so subtle, she almost missed it. A barely perceptible twitch in his eyelid. Then, a ragged, shallow gasp that wasn't hers. It was Ben. Ava's heart lurched. She kept going, her strength suddenly renewed, fueled by this impossible glimmer of hope. He wasn't fully back, not yet, but he was there. He was fighting, and she would fight with him. 2 hours. It had stretched into 2 agonizing, mud-soaked, adrenaline-fueled hours when the full contingent of paramedics finally arrived. Sirens wailing, lights flashing, a sudden, blinding onslaught of organized chaos. Ava, physically and emotionally spent, was still on Ben's chest, her body trembling with exhaustion. She had done the impossible. She had kept him alive. The lead paramedic, a burly man with a neatly trimmed goatee and an air of supreme self-importance, took one look at Ava, covered in mud and grime, straddling the injured minor, and his face contorted into a sneer of professional disgust. He didn't even acknowledge her superhuman effort. He just saw a civilian, an amateur, in the way. "Who the hell is this?" he barked, shoving his way past Officer Riley, who had been trying to explain the situation. He knelt beside Ben, his movements brusque, ignoring Ava entirely. "What have you done? Did you even check for a spinal injury? Do you have any idea what kind of damage you could have caused?" He barked orders at his team, ignoring the gasps and ragged breaths Ava was still taking. Without a word of thanks, without even a glance in her direction, he roughly pushed her aside. His hand landed on her shoulder, a dismissive shove that sent her reeling back. Ava, physically spent and trembling, collapsed onto her knees in the mud, her muscles screaming in protest, the adrenaline finally draining from her system, leaving her hollow and nauseous. Her chest heaved, but it wasn't just from exhaustion. It was from the sting of his contempt, the utter dismissal of her 2-hour battle against death. She watched, a numb agony spreading through her, as they deftly hooked Ben up to monitors, intubated him, and began to stabilize him with practiced, impersonal efficiency. They were good, she knew that. They were professionals, but they hadn't been there for the first 2 hours. They hadn't been there when he was truly dying. As they carefully loaded Ben onto a stretcher, the paramedic in charge cast one last withering glance at Ava. "You need to stay clear, ma'am. You've done enough." The words were like a physical blow, stripping away any shred of pride she might have felt. Before she could even fully process the insult, Officer Riley, having finished with his radio calls, approached her, his face grim. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, his pen poised. This wasn't an inquiry. It was an interrogation. "Ma'am, I need your identification," he stated, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You were found on private property, a restricted worksite, without authorization. That's trespassing." Ava stared at him, bewildered. "Trespassing? I was saving a man's life. That's debatable, given your lack of current certification, ma'am," Riley retorted, his gaze unwavering. "Were you an employee of Titan Coal?" "No, I used to be an ER nurse, but my license is inactive." The words tasted like ash. Riley nodded, scribbling in his notebook. "So, no medical authority, no affiliation with the mine, no permission to be on site. And you interfered with an ongoing emergency response, potentially endangering yourself and others. This creates a significant liability for the property owner." "Liability? He was dead. I brought him back." Ava's voice rose, edged with incredulity and simmering anger. She felt the indignation boiling up, a fresh wave of heat amidst the cold despair. "Whether he was dead or not, ma'am, is a medical determination to be made by licensed professionals, which you are not," Riley said, delivering the blow with dispassionate precision. He tore a page from his notebook. "Here's your citation for trespassing, and I'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement regarding your presence here and your actions." He handed her the slip of paper, then turned away, already moving on to cordon off the area. Ava stared at the citation, a flimsy piece of paper that felt heavier than any rock she'd lifted. She had sacrificed her body, her peace of mind for 2 hours, only to be branded a criminal, a liability. The final insult came from Mr. Davies, the foreman, who seemed to have recovered his composure and was now bristling with renewed corporate loyalty. He approached, flanked by a burly security guard Ava hadn't seen before. Davies held a clipboard, his face a grim mask of officialdom. "Miss Ava, is it?" he began, his voice surprisingly calm, but laced with a chilling undertone. "I'm Mr. Davies, foreman of Titan Coal. I need to inform you that the mining corporation will be holding you fully liable for any procedural breaches that may have occurred here today due to your unauthorized presence and actions." Ava gaped at him. "Procedural breaches? You were standing there doing nothing while he choked to death?" "That is neither here nor there," Davies cut her off, his eyes cold and hard. "You are not to speak to anyone about this incident. No media, no social media, no family members of the injured miner, no one. You are not an official representative, and your statements could compromise the investigation and potentially lead to legal action against the company." He pointed a thick finger at her. "And I highly advise you to cooperate. Titan Coal has a very aggressive legal team. They will not hesitate to pursue damages." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Good day, Miss Ava. I suggest you consult with an attorney. You're going to need one." End of chapter day. Davies turned on his heel, the security guard moving to block Ava's path to the road. She was left standing alone, shivering in the rapidly cooling air, utterly exhausted, covered in mud, clutching a trespassing citation, and threatened with a lawsuit by the very corporation whose employee she had just saved. Her act of pure, selfless compassion had, in the space of a few hours, transformed her from a potential hero into a liability, a criminal, a pariah. The rage that had fueled her CPR was now a bitter, cold ember of despair. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but she had nothing left. She was just a body, aching and broken, in the middle of a destroyed landscape, the distant wail of the ambulance carrying Ben to the hospital, and the truth of her sacrifice, far, far away. Ava woke up the next morning feeling like she'd been hit by a truck. Every muscle screamed in protest, a dull, throbbing ache that permeated her entire body. Her throat was raw, her head pounding. The scent of coal dust seemed to cling to her skin, even after a scalding shower. But it wasn't just physical pain. It was a profound soul, deep weariness, a sense of crushing injustice that settled over her like a shroud. She dragged herself to the kitchen, the eviction notice still on the table, a stark reminder of her precarious existence. She clicked on the old, grainy TV, hoping for some distraction, some validation. The local news was on, and there she was. Her face, smudged with dirt and sweat, eyes wide and desperate, was plastered across the screen. The accompanying headline, however, sent a cold shard of ice through her heart. "Uncertified woman interferes in mine rescue. Questions raised about actions at Titan coal site." The reporter, a local man Ava knew from the diner, stood in front of the mine entrance, looking grave. He then cut to a soundbite from Mr. Davies, the foreman, his face a picture of corporate concern. "While we are grateful for any citizen's desire to help in a crisis," Davies stated, his voice smooth and carefully modulated, "we must emphasize that untrained individuals can inadvertently complicate emergency procedures and even put the victim at further risk." Miss Ava's actions yesterday, while perhaps well-intentioned, were outside of protocol and may have, regrettably, interfered with the initial assessment of the scene. He then offered thoughts and prayers to the injured miner, Ben, without ever acknowledging that Ava had been the one to keep him alive. Ava stared at the screen, a sick feeling twisting in her stomach. "Interfered?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I saved him!" She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling, and scrolled through the local news website. The article was even worse. It quoted anonymous emergency personnel, who vaguely implied her rough handling could have caused more harm than good. And then came the comments section. It was a vicious cesspool of keyboard warriors, eager to tear down anyone who dared to stand out. Typical attention seeker, probably just wanted her 15 minutes of fame. Another idiot thinking they're a hero. She probably just broke all his ribs. Why would she even be there? Sounds like a lawsuit waiting to happen. Good on Titan Coal for calling her out. Uncertified nurse? What a joke. Stick to flipping burgers, sweetheart. Each comment was a fresh stab, twisting the knife of her exhaustion and emotional pain. The very community she had risked everything for, the very people she had believed she was helping, were now crucifying her. She felt a profound, crushing sense of regret. Why had she bothered? Why hadn't she just stood by, like everyone else? It would have been easier, So much easier. Her phone rang, a jarring sound in the oppressive silence of her apartment. It was her landlord, Mrs. Henderson, a woman whose patience wore thin as quickly as her rent was due. Ava? Just following up on that eviction notice? Mrs. Henderson's voice was clipped, unsympathetic. Saw you on the news. Looks like you've got bigger problems than my rent. Just wanted to let you know that doesn't change anything. You still owe me by Friday. Ava mumbled a weak response, her mind numb. She ended the call, the receiver feeling impossibly heavy. The world, it seemed, was conspiring against her. Then, the doorbell rang. Ava, bracing for more bad news, opened it cautiously. A young man in a crisp uniform stood on her doorstep, holding a large, official-looking envelope. Ava Reynolds? He asked, his voice flat. Yes, she managed. Signed for, he said, thrusting a tablet and stylus at her. She scrawled her name, her hand shaking slightly, and he handed her the envelope, turning on his heel without another word. It was a formal, menacing letter from Titan Coal's legal department. A cease and desist. It was 6 pages long, filled with legalese, demanding that she refrain from making any public statements, threatening legal action for defamation, trespass, and potential liability for any further injury to Ben or to Titan Coal's reputation. It cited her unprofessional and unauthorized conduct and listed potential damages that could amount to hundreds of thousands of dollars. She sank onto the sofa, the letter clutched in her hand. Her head fell into her hands. The weight of it all was suffocating. She was facing financial ruin, public scorn, and potentially a devastating lawsuit, all for trying to save a life. The injustice of it was a bitter, choking taste in her mouth. She had wanted to help, to be good, to make a difference. Instead, she had only managed to make her already desperate situation infinitely worse. Tears, hot and furious, finally welled in her eyes, blurring the edges of her miserable, lonely reality. She was completely alone. Just as the despair threatened to completely swallow her, a small, unexpected crack of light appeared. Her phone buzzed again, an unknown number from Charleston. She almost didn't answer it, fearing another demand or another insult. But something compelled her to pick up. Hello? Her voice was still hoarse from crying. Is this Ava Reynolds? The voice on the other end was soft, hesitant, unmistakably female. My name is Sarah. I'm an ICU nurse at Charleston General. I hope I'm not bothering you, but I just had to call. Ava's heart gave a tiny lurch of hope. Sarah? How did you get my number? Doesn't matter right now, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, as if she was afraid of being overheard. Look, I know what they're saying on the news. I've seen the articles. But I need you to know, Ben Miller, the miner, he's in my unit. And what you did? It was a miracle. Ava felt a sudden, dizzying wave of relief. He's okay? He's stable. Critical, but stable, Sarah confirmed, a note of awe in her voice. But the doctors here, they're calling it impossible. They said he had 0 chance. His vitals when he arrived were abysmal, but his brain activity, it was there. They said whoever performed the CPR, they were relentless. They kept his brain oxygenated through a period where he should have been brain dead. She paused, and Ava could almost hear the reverence in her voice. They said you kept him alive long enough for us to do our job. You gave him a fighting chance. Don't listen to what they're saying, Ava. Whatever you did, you saved him. The words were a balm to Ava's wounded soul, the first real validation she'd received. She closed her eyes, a fresh wave of tears, but this time they were tears of immense, fragile relief. Thank you, she whispered, the gratitude choking her. Thank you, Sarah. Just wanted you to know, Sarah said, her voice returning to its normal volume, a hint of steel in it now. Some of us here, we understand. Don't let them silence you. The call ended, leaving Ava with a renewed sense of purpose, a flicker of the old fire she thought was long extinguished. Someone, somewhere, saw the truth. Later that afternoon, another knock came at her door. Ava hesitated, her guard instantly back up, but when she peered through the peephole, she saw a woman she didn't recognize, her face etched with exhaustion and worry, but her eyes bright with a desperate hope. Ava opened the door a crack. Can I help you? Ava? Are you Ava Reynolds? The woman asked, her voice thick with emotion. My name is Maria Miller. I'm Ben's wife. Ava's breath hitched. She expected anger, resentment, blame. The news had painted her as a reckless liability. Maria, however, was in tears, not with anger, but with an overwhelming, almost suffocating gratitude. "They told me," Maria choked out, her voice breaking. "The doctors. They told me what you did. 2 hours. You didn't stop for 2 hours. They said if it wasn't for you, he wouldn't have made it to the hospital. He'd be gone." A tear tracked a clean path through the grime on her cheek. "Thank you. Oh God, thank you." Maria took a stumbling step forward and embraced Ava, a fierce, desperate hug that caught Ava off guard. Ava, stiff at first, slowly returned the embrace, feeling the raw emotion, the pure, unadulterated relief pouring from the other woman. Maria pulled back, sniffling, then clutched a plastic container she'd been holding. I brought you something. It's not much, just some pot roast. Ben always loved it." Her eyes pleaded with Ava. "I saw the news. I saw what they were saying. It's not true. None of it. You're not a liability. You're our angel." Ava took the container, her hands still trembling, but now from a different kind of emotion. This was what she had sought, what she had hoped for in her nursing days. A genuine human connection, a life touched, truly, unequivocally saved. The pot roast was warm, the smell comforting, a small anchor in the storm of her despair. "The whole town, they're starting to talk," Maria said, wiping her eyes. "They saw you. They saw you down there for so long. They're saying the news is wrong. They're saying Mr. Davies is a liar." A flicker of defiance entered Maria's eyes. "I won't let them do this to you. Ben wouldn't either. When he wakes up, he'll tell them all." Maria's words, humble as they were, ignited a spark. It wasn't just Sarah's professional validation. It was the raw, human gratitude of the family, the truth whispered in the face of corporate lies. It reminded Ava why she had acted, why she had pushed through the pain and the doubt. It wasn't for headlines or accolades. It was for Ben. It was for Maria. It was for the simple, profound act of saving a human life. And that, she realized, was a truth that even Titan Cole couldn't bury. Encouraged by Maria's unwavering support and the quiet validation from Sarah, Ava decided she couldn't hide anymore. Ben was still in critical condition, but stable. She needed to see him, to put a face to the name she had fought for. It was a pilgrimage, a reaffirmation of her purpose, a necessary step in reclaiming her shattered sense of self. She arrived at Charleston General Hospital, a sprawling, modern facility that felt a million miles away from the dusty, collapsing mine entrance. The air inside was sterile, hushed, the polar opposite of the chaos she'd endured. But as she approached the ICU waiting area, she saw them. Mr. Davies, the foreman, still radiating corporate smugness, and a stern-faced woman in an expensive suit beside him, whom Ava immediately recognized as a lawyer. Two burly men, clearly hospital security, stood nearby, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Davies saw her first, and his face, already tight, contorted into a mask of barely contained fury. "Just what do you think you're doing here, Miss Reynolds?" he sneered, stepping forward to block her path, the corporate lawyer, Miss Albright, taking a position beside him, her arms crossed, her eyes cold and calculating. "I'm here to see Ben Miller," Ava stated, her voice trembling slightly, but firm. She met his gaze directly, refusing to be intimidated. "That will not be happening," Miss Albright cut in, her voice like ice. "Mr. Miller is a patient of Titan Cole. All visitation is to be cleared through us. And frankly, your presence here, given the ongoing legal review, is highly inappropriate. You are disturbing the peace and creating a hostile environment." Hostile environment?" Ava scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "I'm here because I saved his life, something you people were perfectly happy to let him lose. Your unauthorized and amateur actions are precisely what we are investigating," Davies interjected, stepping closer, his voice low and menacing. "You have no right to be here, no professional standing, and no connection to this patient other than as a potential liability. Now, I suggest you leave before we have security escort you out and add a restraining order to your growing list of legal troubles." The two security guards took a step forward, their faces impassive. Ava felt a surge of familiar helplessness, the same crushing weight of injustice from the day before. The system, once again, was ganging up on her, trying to silence her, to erase her act of heroism. "I was told by his wife that I could visit him," Ava said, clinging to Maria's words. "And I don't care what your lawyers say. He wouldn't be alive for you to even have this conversation if it weren't for me." The confrontation escalated. Voices began to rise. Other families in the waiting area started to stare, drawn by the tension. Davies, emboldened by the presence of his lawyer and security, raised his voice further. "You are a trespasser, Miss Reynolds. You are a fraud. You will not step 1 foot closer to that man, or we will press charges for harassment." Just as Miss Albright was about to signal the security guards to physically remove Ava, a quiet, unassuming voice cut through the clamor. "Is this the woman, Mr. Davies?" Everyone turned. Standing a few feet away, unnoticed until now, was an elderly man in a simple tweed jacket, his silver hair neatly combed, his eyes sharp and intelligent behind wire-rimmed glasses. He had an aura of quiet authority that immediately silenced the room. He didn't shout, didn't posture, he simply spoke, and everyone listened. Davies' bluster instantly deflated. His face, which had been red with fury, paled visibly. "Mr. Thompson! Sir! I didn't realize you were here!" Arthur Thompson, the reclusive, semi-retired owner of the entire Titan coal conglomerate. The man who held Blackwood, and indeed much of the region's economic fate, in his hands. He had flown in on his private jet, not for a corporate meeting, but because Ben Miller's wife, Maria, had made a desperate, heartfelt call to his executive assistant, bypassing the layers of corporate bureaucracy, telling the real story. Thompson's gaze, cool and appraising, settled on Ava. Then he looked at Davies, then at Miss Albright. "So, this is the unauthorized civilian you've been so eager to discredit, Mr. Davies?" "Sir, with all due respect, her actions were highly irregular and created significant liability for the company," Miss Albright began, attempting to regain control. Thompson held up a hand, silencing her with a quiet gesture. "I have just had a very enlightening conversation with Mrs. Miller, and with the attending physician on Mr. Miller's case. Their accounts differ significantly from your carefully crafted press releases and legal threats, Mr. Davies. Significantly." He then turned back to Ava, his expression softening slightly. "Miss Reynolds, my apologies for the behavior of my employees. I understand you spent 2 hours performing CPR on Mr. Miller. Is that correct?" Ava, stunned by this sudden shift, could only nod. "Yes, sir." Thompson's eyes hardened as he turned back to Davies. "Mr. Davies, your focus on liability over human life, your willingness to demonize a woman who performed an act of selfless heroism, is an abomination. It is not only morally reprehensible, but it is a fundamental betrayal of the values I thought this company stood for." Davies stammered, his face ashen. "Sir, I was merely following company policy to protect our interests." "Your company policy just cost you your job, Mr. Davies," Thompson stated, his voice calm but absolute. "You are fired. Effective immediately. Miss Albright, I expect you to handle his severance, and his replacement will be briefed thoroughly on what protecting our interests truly means." Miss Albright, though clearly shocked, nodded, her professional veneer barely cracking. Thompson then turned to Officer Riley, who had just arrived, responding to the escalating noise, looking utterly bewildered. "Officer, may I have your badge number? I will be having a conversation with your captain. We will discuss the merits of rewarding heroism, not punishing it with trespass citations. Is that clear?" Riley, speechless, could only stammer out his badge number. Thompson then turned back to Ava, his gaze now filled with a deep, almost paternal sadness. "Miss Reynolds, my own father died in a mine collapse decades ago. No one was there to help him. To hear that someone, a stranger, refused to give up on one of my miners, it means more than I can say." He reached into the inner pocket of his tweed jacket and produced a thick, cream-colored envelope. "This isn't a payment, Miss Reynolds. It's a thank you, from one human being to another, for your incredible courage and compassion. It's also, I will be frank, for your silence. Not about the rescue itself. The truth will come out, and you will be rightfully celebrated for that, but for the appalling way my company handled it. This is to ensure you have the resources to never have to endure such injustice again." He handed her the envelope. Ava's fingers trembled as she took it. It was thick, substantial. Inside, nestled amongst a few official-looking documents, was a check. She pulled it out, her eyes widening, her breath catching in her throat. The amount was staggering. $500,000. Thompson offered a faint, sad smile. "Now go see your patient, Miss Reynolds. He's asking for you." Ava walked through the ICU doors in a daze, the check clutched in her hand like a talisman. The scent of antiseptic filled her nostrils, familiar and comforting, a stark contrast to the dust and despair of the mine. She found Ben's room, her heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and lingering exhaustion. He was pale, tubes and wires snaking from his body, but his eyes were open, clear, and lucid. Maria sat by his bedside, holding his hand, tears streaming down her face but smiling. When Ben saw Ava, a weak but genuine smile spread across his lips. "My angel," he whispered, his voice raspy from the intubation. He reached out a trembling hand. Ava took it, the warmth of his fingers, a tangible connection to the 2 hours of hell she'd endured for him. Tears welled in her own eyes, but this time they were not of frustration or despair, but of profound relief and gratitude. She had done it. She had truly saved him. The reunion was quiet, emotional, a shared moment of incredible intimacy forged in the crucible of life and death. Maria hugged Ava again, thanking her profusely, her gratitude a healing balm. It was everything Ava had needed, everything she had been denied by the unfeeling machinery of protocol and corporate self-preservation. A short epilogue unfolded in the following weeks. The news story, now corrected by a furious Arthur Thompson, transformed overnight. Ava Reynolds, the uncertified woman, became the Angel of Blackwood, her image now widely circulated with headlines praising her heroic 2-hour CPR effort. Mr. 1125 CPR effort. Davies was not only fired but publicly disgraced. Officer Riley was put on indefinite desk duty pending a full review of his conduct, the incident a stark lesson in bureaucratic rigidity versus human compassion. Titan Cole, under Thompson's direct orders, issued a public apology to Ava and a substantial donation to local community services in Blackwood, specifically earmarked for emergency response training. Ava, with the life-changing check, meticulously paid off her debts, including the now voided eviction notice. The weight that had crushed her for so long finally lifted. But she didn't just use the money for herself. The anger, the frustration, the feeling of being powerless against the system had ignited a new fire within her. She re-enrolled in school, not to return to the ER, but to pursue an advanced nursing practitioner degree, determined to make a more systemic difference. And true to her promise, and in honor of the community that had initially turned on her, then rallied behind her, she anonymously set up a fund. The Ben Miller Lifesaver Initiative provided free, comprehensive emergency medical training, including CPR and first aid, for every resident of Blackwood. Months later, Ava stood in the dusty gymnasium of the Blackwood Community Center, not in a uniform, but in comfortable clothes, her auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Before her sat dozens of Blackwood residents, young and old, eager faces watching her every move. She demonstrated proper hand placement for CPR on a dummy, her movements confident, practiced, effortless. "Remember," she told them, her voice clear and strong, filled with a newfound purpose, "the first few minutes are critical. You don't need a fancy certification to save a life. You just need courage and the will to not give up." Among the faces in the crowd, she saw Maria, smiling, a proud glow in her eyes. And in the back, a man, slightly thinner, a faint scar visible on his cheek, but alive. Ben. He gave her a subtle nod, a silent acknowledgement of the life she had given him back. Ava smiled back, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached her eyes. The scars of her burnout, the sting of injustice, would always be there. But they were no longer debilitating. They were fuel. She had faced the darkness, navigated the rage, and emerged, not just with a life-changing check, but with a renewed sense of purpose, a powerful, unwavering belief in the simple, profound act of human compassion. She had saved a minor, yes, but in doing so, she had also saved herself, forging a new beginning from the ashes of a collapsed mind and a broken heart.